Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Fire Breathing Rob. Please like and subscribe to our videos on YouTube. If you're listening to us on another platform, thanks so much, and definitely pass the word. We're definitely trying to keep building and put all different unique stories on our platform. I have somebody that is very knowledgeable on Universal Orlando and Universal Parks in general. Lee Mallaby, and he runs the Unofficial Universal Orlando podcast. And he is actually from over the pond right now, still over there. And Lee, we're grateful to have you on. So
I'm
Lee,
happy to talk Universal anytime.
sounds great. And I definitely want to have you on again because I've listened to your podcast quite a few times and learning about you. And I really enjoy you and the rest of the gang on the podcast. So
Thank you.
let's get into this firstly. Lee, when did you have that first thought and say, hey, I want to start a podcast of some place that you really love and enjoy, which is Universal Orlando?
Funnily enough, it was the last time you visited Universal Orlando, Rob, back in 2011.
Wow.
My wife and I had been out twice at that point, and then we took out the kids in 2009, and I've become obsessed with Orlando. It was our 2004 trip was a once-in-a-lifetime trip, and then we went back another twice, and we've been back like another 6 times since at that point, and just fell in love with the place. And to be honest, when we first went, we were huge Disney fans. It was Disney that we went for, but we, over the course of 3 visits, completely fell in love with Universal Orlando. So coming back, wanting to sort of immerse myself in the theme parks when I couldn't be in it, I discovered podcasts. And there wasn't any Universal podcasts out there at the time. It was all Disney. So I listened to quite a few of them and actually guested on one. And that's where it kind of sparked an interest in me. That's like, I really enjoyed this. I like talking. Podcasting seems to be right up my alley. And my knowledge at that point was mostly Disney. So it's like, what can I bring to the podcast table as far as my knowledge of Disney? And honestly, at that point, nothing. There's nothing that's not already out there. So I decided, let's do a Universal podcast. Long story short, I asked Tracy if she would join me on it, and she was like, no, I don't want to do that. And we started it back in 2011, and I've never looked back. It has become an obsession. It is not my job. It is a side. It's not even a business. It's a hobby, really, at this point. We're 9 years later with 400 episodes in, and it's just become a complete obsession with me. And Orlando has become a second home to us at this point. We have people we class as family who live out there, and it's become more than a vacation when we do actually travel to Orlando at this point.
What do you feel like you enjoy covering the most? There's so many things and Universal's grown so much since the 90s when they opened, but even through the past 10 years, they've added resorts. Now they're adding another theme park within the next couple of years. We'll see what happens now with the coronavirus, as they probably will, cut costs as Disney does also. But with that said, what do you feel like you really enjoy covering as far as the podcast goes for Universal?
I think one of the things that when I started UUOP, it was I wanted to create a podcast that I wanted to listen to, something that wasn't out there. So rather than us just covering the news or interviews, we cover everything and anything we possibly can. But one of the things that I wanted to set out when we began the podcast was, if you listen to Disney podcasts or read any Disney history books, everyone knows the history of every ride at Disney at this point, the Haunted Mansion, Pirates of the Caribbean. All their backstory is documented. No one really knows the backstory of Universal Orlando. So having guests on who were there at the inception of the parks or have worked on those initial attractions, like you say, Confrontation or Jaws, delving into that history of the parks is something that I really wanted to get into with the podcast, and that's something I thoroughly enjoy covering on the show, which we still do quite extensively.
Prefer Universal now, and I remember when Universal opened up, it was ride the movies. That was their slogan. You had all those old classic movies, and now I feel like they put all this stuff all over the place. I mean, you have Fast and Furious in San Francisco. Yeah, it took place in California, but the theming is all wrong, I feel like. And there's a lot of other attractions they just put in places where I feel like the theming wasn't even correct. So with that said, what do you think about Universal from now and from the park of the 1990s when it opened up?
It's difficult for me to be objective on it because I never visited the parks till 2004, so I never got to experience like Confrontation or what else am I missing? Nothing of the major ones. Like the Ghostbusters Spooktacular, which I'm,
Ghostbusters.
as a huge Ghostbusters fan, I am so disappointed we never got to see that. But Jaws was one of our favourite attractions. You're right, it was. It was set up as a theme park that was all about teaching you how movies were made. But the problem is, I think, I'm going to play devil's advocate now. Things have changed. Movies aren't made the same way they were 30 years ago. So they've had to evolve. You look at Hollywood studios, Disney as well. They've done the same because things aren't what they used to be, and you can't show that movie making magic like you used to be able to. I do agree with you. They have kind of plonked certain attractions just down with no sort of sense of theming around them. But then really, if you look at Universal Studios Florida when it first opened, there wasn't a lot of theming around it then either, really.
Well, they did have certain attractions in New York. Like, for instance, I know they put Jimmy Fallon in New York. It takes place in New York.
Yeah.
But that was just because Comcast bought Universal.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, that's, simple things that anybody that's you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that. with that said, we did have Ghostbusters in New York. I know they did put Twister in that area too, and that's in Oklahoma. That's got really not much to do with with New York in general. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I just feel like when the park opened, it was more geared to those classic movies that, you could be, growing up now. I mean, I'm 30 years old. Johnny is in his 20s, and he knows E.T. and he loves E.T. That came out way before he was even born. He was born
Well, that's
in
because he had good
1999.
parents.
True. Yeah. Right. Yeah, so you do get those you still get those people that do love those classic movies. That's what I was getting to. T2, that show just closed a couple years back. That was I know the technology was a little out of whack, but they could have updated it a little bit as far as that goes and kept the same show. People love that show. That was constantly full.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just feel like it's just like taken over by, I don't know if the creative team, I know you spoke to a lot of people that have been on the creative team, you said, but, speaking to these people, what do they tell you as far as, like you said, they plop these attractions in just these spots and there's no theming. I just feel like it's just out of whack. Am I, talking wrong?
No, I think you are. I think it's difficult because the creative team are hamstrung by the bean counters. So it's the problem is that you've got a major corporation in Comcast behind them, and they want to see a return on the investment that they're putting into those theme parks. And they have pumped some money into Universal Orlando since they bought the company out in, I think it was 2012. Someone correct me wrong. They have spent millions and millions of dollars pumped into that park, and you can understand why. See, we kind of discussed this a little bit before we started recording with Fast and Furious, and putting in attractions in Orlando that seem to be the same as they are in Hollywood. And from a financial point of view for Comcast, to port an attraction from one resort to the other, the cost is a lot more negligible than it is building something from scratch. So if you've already done the R&D work for Fast and Furious as part of the tram tour out in Hollywood, then the cost of bringing that to Orlando is a lot less than it would be of creating something completely new.
Well, Lee, even since you've only been going to Universal since 2004, but that's still quite a long time.
Yeah.
You've seen attractions come and go. With that said, what is your take on, before Comcast bought it in 2012? Do you think it was a more exciting park than it is now, like, what we've been just kind of talking about in a little bit?
Again, it's difficult for me to be objective because I have such a connection to the resort now. It's difficult for me to look objectively at it. It's different. The thing is, when we first went, Islands of Adventure was fairly new. I know we're not talking about Islands of Adventure strictly, but when you look at the resort as a whole, Islands of Adventure was brand new, and it was like nothing else we'd seen at that point. The problem is now, Islands of Adventure hasn't had an awful lot done to it. It's still, other than Skull Island Reign of Kong, which going on to Fast and Furious is exactly the same thing that they did with Fast and Furious. They took an attraction that was part of the tram tour over in Hollywood, but I love Reign of Kong.
Yeah.
I think they did a really good job on it, whereas Fast and Furious is like, eh.
Yeah.
But they haven't done an awful lot in Islands of Adventure, and I think sometimes they're trying to spread themselves a little too thin. I'm concerned at how much this pandemic's going to affect the amount of money that Comcast are going to put into things. They've already announced that the building of Epic Universe, the third theme park, is going to be delayed, and that looked like it was going to be, again, a step up from what Islands of Adventure was when that opened. This was going to be that again. It's difficult. I love Universal Orlando now. I can see its faults. When we went in 2015, we spent the entire week at Universal, and going from screen attraction to screen attraction got old very quickly. It really did. And I hate to say that because I love the resort, but it really did.
Disney keeps a lot of their classic attractions, whether they've been there for 30, 40, whatever many years they've been. Small World, Space Mountain, Peter Pan's Flight. These have been in Magic Kingdom since it opened. You go to the park in Disneyland, as we spoke about, there's a lot of those same attractions, but there's also different ones that you're not going to get at Disney World. The same thing goes for the parks in China and the other part they have in France and Disneyland Paris too. So there's all different attractions. But that's the problem I have with Universal, to go back to getting rid of all those old classic rides. You know, they put a lot of thought into those rides. A lot of those sets were built, and then we moved to screens. You know, Disney keeps a lot of those classic rides, whereas Universal just kind of said, okay, not a lot of people are going, so, you know, we'll just shelf it. And, you know, for some of the rides, that's totally fine. I understand it's all about profit margins, and now Comcast is really putting a lot of money into Universal, so I understand that. But I feel like some of them are classics, such as even E.T., which is still there, and I feel like if Spielberg didn't have that, you know, agreement with Universal, in which they would have to shelf Jurassic Park and a lot of other rides. Transformers he's also involved with, so they'd have to cut down half of the whole studios if they got rid of E.T. But if that agreement wasn't in place, Lee, you know, E.T. would be gone too, because the attraction over there isn't much anymore. So I feel like it's really sad. What do you think about that argument, where Disney does keep some of those attractions, whereas Universal just pretty much shelves them all?
Right. Okay. Let's see where we're going to go with this. I'm going to be slightly in favor of Universal again, because Disney has something that Universal doesn't, and that is space. Yeah. They have a lot more space to work with, so they can update a lot of so the Magic Kingdom, for example, they can bring new attractions to that park because they had space to expand into. So you look at when they built New Fantasyland with the Voyage of the Little Mermaid, or whatever it's called, Ariel's, whatever the hell that thing's called, and then the Beauty and the Beast and all of that's out there. They could expand that Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, and then bring in Tron there. Now, Universal don't have that luxury. They're very much in a very small...
They did have, sorry to interrupt you, Lee, but
they
did have all that space where Nickelodeon Studio was. They could have knocked that down and built quite a few attractions in that spot. There was a lot of space. There was, 2 or 3 sound stages in that area where Nickelodeon Studios was?
I've never actually been in there.
Oh, okay. Well, well, I know there's at least 2 sound stages in there. So, I mean, they could have built at least 2 rides in there. I'm not trying to go back and forth.
No,
I'm just
you're
saying
right.
that there is they put the Blue Man Group, and I've never went to a Blue Man Group show.
No,
I'm not trying to bash it or anything, but it's space. You know, I mean, there's space where you could do something with that and add an additional 2 rides over there. Because remember, Nickelodeon Studios used to be inside the park. So, in which now it's outside the park with Blue Man Group right now. So, I'm just saying, as you know, to go back at you a little bit, that there is space there that you could build, 2 or 3 more attractions. But go ahead, Lee. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. You can call me out. No, you're right. That is right. But again, sort of playing devil's advocate with you, they haven't got that space that Disney have. And I think a lot of it, again, comes down to the corporate side of things now. I think the money guys do run the resort a lot more. I think creative want to do a lot of things but can't because they aren't being given those funds to do it. I've got it. So
Okay.
yeah, a lot of those old attractions, so things like Jaws,
Yeah.
and Confrontation, not so much Back to the Future, but Jaws and definitely Confrontation were rides that had a lot of moving parts, a lot of animatronics, a lot of wear and tear, and the upkeep on those attractions is expensive.
Right.
Again, I'm not saying I completely agree with screens, but when you look at it from an upkeep point of view, it's much easier for them to upkeep a screen than it is to spend money repainting animatronics, replacing hydraulic parts. I know the barge explosion scene in Jaws, about 3/4 of the way through, cost them a fortune.
Yeah.
And I think Universal aren't trying to be Disney. I think that's the main point in this. They're not trying to follow in Disney's footsteps. They're trying to be different and step out of their footsteps. So again, we're talking about those old attractions and looking at nostalgia. Universal has nostalgia, but it's not the same as Disney. It's not nostalgia. Whereas people at Disney have nostalgia for the Disney films that they grew up in, they grew up watching. And then the attractions that have been there, like you say, Pirates of the Caribbean, Haunted Mansion, Space Mountain, that have been there for 20, 30 years or more. Whereas Universal are looking at a nostalgic point of view from things that, like Harry Potter.
Yeah.
When they brought Harry Potter into those theme parks, that was a game changer, not just for Universal Orlando, but for theme parks in general. And it does worry me that it seems to be a lot of the money that they spend in the parks is all on the Harry Potter stuff, and it does worry me a little bit.
Well, that's
Because
what I think. Disney has a problem with right now. You go to Hollywood Studios, it's basically Toy Story and Star Wars, and that's
yeah,
it. And my thing is, I know a lot of people love Star Wars. I'm not really that big of a fan of it. But if you do love Star Wars, such as Disney, they have tons and tons of money. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. They could have built another park and get it totally towards
yeah,
Star Wars. People would have came in droves, and they could have kept Hollywood Studios as the movie park, such as what Universal Studios Orlando is, as far as that goes. But that's one of my disagreements with Disney as far as Hollywood Studios goes. But talking about the Epic Universe Park, what is your opinion on it so far? I know everything hasn't been revealed, but I know there's going to be a lot of rides with Nintendo. Is that ride fully geared to Nintendo? I've heard a lot that it's Nintendo. The monsters are going to have an area, the Universal Monsters, and there's going to be some other stuff. Can you give the viewers a little bit of information on that?
So the problem is Universal have said very little about Epic Universe at this point. We seem to be, as far as our information coming out, seem to be very reliant. I will give her a plug on Alicia Stella over at Theme Park Stop. She's a good friend of ours, so I don't mind plugging her. She has done some extensive work as far as information of what that park's going to be. And the stuff that she's put out, she said there will be a Super Nintendo World, which we're already starting to get a bit of a glimpse at because the one in Japan looks like it's not far off being finished at this point. And if the things we're hearing about that land become true, it sounds like it's, again, to use that term, a game changer. It's going to be something we've never seen before. Then we're looking at, like you say, Classic Monsters, which is a strange one to me, but I suppose it's them reaching into their heritage because, let's be honest, Universal Studios was built on the classic monster movies. So I'm not against that, even though I'm not the biggest fan. We're getting more Harry Potter, kind of. It looks like there's going to be a Fantastic Beasts land
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
in there, which I'm more than happy about. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and the more of that stuff they can put in, the more I will eat it up. And then something we've been craving for quite a while when they announced Comcast buying DreamWorks is a How to Train Your Dragon land.
I would ask you this though, to tap on Harry Potter. I know this is a different kind of aspect of the park, but since you brought it up with Harry Potter, I was told that if Fast and Furious didn't bomb, they wouldn't have built Harry Potter. As far as in the new Harry Potter ride, is that true?
I have not heard that. That's an interesting one.
Because
I
well,
would be
Johnny brought that up
surprised.
to me, and he said that a cast member told him that because he said, Fast and Furious is, he doesn't like it, and he told the he said, you better be happy that Fast and Furious bombed because they wouldn't have built that ride since it's such a huge ride and people love Harry Potter as an
I
addition.
I'm not going to call Johnny out, but I would be interested because I don't know. But I would be
Right.
interested to look at the dates for when Fast and Furious was announced
Hmm.
and when Dragon Challenge closed down at Islands of Adventure
Take on
Prize.
Fast and Furious. When we got into that, you said you wanted to draw, and the thing that I loved Earthquake, as I said, I loved all these old rides. And, it could get so old, but it was the magic of the movies. They showed you how they made all the, even Disaster, even though they changed the little concept at the beginning and stuff like that, it was still, let's be honest, basically Earthquake.
Yeah.
They showed you how it was. And my thing was, if they wanted to put Fast and Furious, couldn't they have? And I know it's not Earthquake, but they use the buses there, so it's somewhat of the same concept with that, with the bus. But couldn't they have made it a little bit better as far as just kind of shaking a little bit? I mean, what do you think of this? I know you said you have a little bit of love for Fast and Furious. I have a little bit
Ah,
of love for the movies, but not for the ride.
yeah, right. Um, so let me get it out of the way and explain why I don't mind it. If people keep telling me I love it, I don't love it. I don't mind it. I know. I don't get me wrong. I know what it is. I see that attraction for what it is, and it's terrible. But let me clarify it. So we came out to Orlando last year in
Mhm.
October, and we actually held a podcast event at the parks last year
Oh,
called
cool.
UOP The Weekender, and it was mine and Tracy's first ride on Fast and Furious Supercharged, and we had our entire group took over one of those party buses, so the entire bus was
Wow.
our group. So you can imagine it was a completely different experience just having a
Yeah.
whole group of friends and listeners riding Fast and Furious together for the first time, because they were all expecting for us to be like, that is the worst attraction, because everyone else thinks it is the worst attraction ever to be built in a theme park in history. Tracy hated it. She hated it. I was like, I didn't mind it. And everyone was like, they couldn't believe it. But it's, again, I think if they hadn't have done Skull Island Reign of Kong,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have looked as bad. But as I said earlier, when you look at it, it's exactly the same thing, that they've took a portion of the tram tour from Hollywood and made an attraction out of it. And Skull Island works really well because I think they fleshed out an entire story for it. The whole facade and area they built it in Islands of Adventure is stunning. It is absolutely gorgeous. Whereas Fast and Furious is very bland from the outside. Yeah, the actual ride video is terrible. Like the
That's what I've
resolution
heard.
of
Yeah.
it, just the actual CG. It's not even like real footage. The CG, like the computer generated
Like a
characters that
video
look
game, they said.
awful. Yeah, it's awful. But I think because I went in expecting it to be the worst thing ever, I kind of went, it's not that bad. I mean, don't get me wrong. I know exactly what it is. We've talked about it on the podcast for so long. It would be interesting to see, knowing that it never demands a wait, ever, even when the rest of the park is heaving.
Well, that's my thing, Lee. Now that it's, fairly new attraction, it's only been there for a couple of years. Everybody hates it. As you said, there's no line for it. So what is Universal going to do now? They have all that space. Remember, they closed down 2 attractions to put that just one attraction in there. And as you said, with no one going, it's probably going to be there for at least what, 8 to 10 years maximum, maybe more. Who knows? Because they keep pumping out those movies. So it seems like a lot of money now down the drain.
It is because, like you said, no one's going to it, and you've took out two pretty big people eaters. I think Beetlejuice was quite a huge stadium,
Right.
and then the people going through Earthquake, and now you've probably got a quarter of those people going into that attraction, which is making everything else in the park busier because people aren't going to Fast and Furious because they know it's terrible. I don't know at what point they would hold their hands up and go, you're right, we got it wrong. It's terrible. Let's take it out. I don't know whether they would ever do that. Obviously, they're going to do it at some point. We always said the longevity of that ride would potentially be 5 years. I think
Oh,
5 years,
wow.
and they would maybe consider it. But when you've got an attraction that's not getting any traffic, when do you, like you say, hold your hands up and admit that it's just not something people want to ride, and admit your mistake and move on and do something else?
So let me ask you one more question about an attraction. We saw the Simpsons ride, and it took over Back to the Future. It does fairly well over there, but Disney bought Fox. They're gonna own. They own the Simpsons, correct now with that
Yeah,
deal. Yeah. So with that, how long is that attraction gonna last now? And that's been there since what, 2007, 2008,
yeah, I
something
think it
like
about
that,
right.
around
Yeah.
that time period. So it's not, incredibly old. But with that said, how long is that going to be there now? That's another ride that, they could be putting something new in.
It is, and it's an interesting point as well, because it's not just an attraction. They
Yeah.
opened the whole Springfield land there with there's a Kang and Kodos twirl and hurl in there, so it's not just a case of if they decided they wanted to replace the Symptoms, they've got the Symptoms. That's not a word. It is a word, but not that. The Simpsons. If they wanted to replace the Simpsons, then it's not just a case of changing that ride. They'd have to change that whole land, and admittedly, it's not the biggest land in the park, but it's something they would have to look at replacing the whole thing. But to put it into perspective, Marvel Superhero Island is still in Islands of Adventure, and Disney own Marvel at this point.
Yeah.
So I suppose that Universal will have to look at how much money are they making off having the Simpsons still in that park.
Hmm. I feel like there's a lot of open questions at Universal Studios, more so than Islands of Adventure, as of things that could be replaced and that have been there for constantly long periods of time
Yeah,
that a lot of people don't. I mean, the shows will always get people because people want to sit down, they
agreed.
want to relax, it's hot out. So you're going to get somebody that wants to take it easy and just sit and watch something. So, you always get people, even if it's not full. But these other things like the kids' playground, Barney, if you don't have kids, you're not going to those places.
No, it's interesting because there's been a lot of rumors surrounding Kid Zone for the last 4 or 5 years. We
Right.
heard Barney was closing so many times over the last few years. I think originally there was rumors of when Nintendo first came on the scene, when Universal got into bed with Nintendo, and they weren't building Epic Universe, and they didn't know they were going to have an entire land down there. I think originally Pokemon was rumored to be going in there, and then Hyrule from Legends of Zelda, that was. I think at this point, Universal still needs something in that park that is strictly aimed at kids. Again, talking about the podcast series I've just done, it's something we brought up, that Universal is not geared for little children at all. Nearly every attraction in both of those parks has a height requirement. There's very few that don't.
Right.
But yeah, we talked about it already. Who knows? Who knows who Barney is now? Woody Woodpecker. Like I think there was a movie came out last year. It looked terrible. Fievel, Curious George. Like no one knows. No kids know who those
No,
who those are. But I think as far as Kids Zone goes, there's a lot of water splash areas, and kids love running around in. I don't know why. I don't get it, but kids do. I think the thing you're probably going to find is taking COVID-19
yeah.
into the equation, that a lot of those, we are hearing that when the parks open, a lot of those kids' play areas aren't going to open. So Camp
Right.
Jurassic, if I ran the zoo in Zeus Landing, probably Fievel's Playland and Curious George probably aren't going to open, especially with water, because it's a potential.
Well, my thing is when you spoke about COVID-19, what's going to happen with these rides? People go on the rides. How are they going to, what are they going to have somebody disinfecting every ride? Not ride, but every, like, for instance, ET. What is somebody going to go on every bike and wipe it down every time? Like, I mean, you know how big the lines would be for that
I think they'll
ride,
have
but
to.
I
The
don't know how
interesting
they're going
thing
to do
is,
that.
well, the interesting thing is when the parks reopen this week, they've already said they're going to cut capacity.
Right.
What that capacity actually is, we don't know, because they sent a survey out a few months ago asking for people's opinions on, and they talked about 75% capacity, 50% capacity, and even 25% capacity. But when you think about a theme park that's got potentially 20,000 people in it, 10,000 people in a theme park is still a lot of people. And I'm quite surprised that they've decided to open everything at once. They did the test run with City Walk, which seems to have gone relatively well. Everyone we've spoken to says they seem to have handled it a lot better than Disney has, actually. I expected them to do a phased opening and maybe open Islands of Adventure first with reduced capacity and see how that goes. But no, they're opening June 1st. Everything is opening for team members first. So team members 1st and 2nd of June. Then it's annual pass, some annual pass holders and invited guests on the 3rd and the 4th, and then the general public on the 5th. But again, reduced capacity. We have a trip booked in October to go out for Halloween Horror Nights. Now, let's not even get into Halloween Horror Nights because I don't know whether that'll go ahead. And Halloween Horror Nights, how you do that with social distancing is a headache I wouldn't want. But you've potentially got people coming from, like we would be over from the UK, spending thousands of dollars to get over there and getting a less than normal experience at a theme park. It's going to be strange. It's got very dark and heavy, by the way, from where we were originally.
Let's go into some more lighthearted questions as we end the interview with the lighthearted questions. Lee, what is your favorite attraction at Universal? In general, Islands of Adventure or Universal Studios?
I have to say Men in Black Alien Attack.
Really? Wow, interesting.
Because I am such a competitive person and my wife is such a competitive person. And I think it's going back to kind of what we talked about before. Like one of the things, we're going off a side tangent again here, so I do apologize, that one of the things we've noticed the theme parks have got rid of a lot over the last 10 years is actors in attractions or on ride vehicles. It's gone for the most part. Which means, like, you look at Jaws. Jaws was a different experience every time you rode it, depending on the team member you got as your skipper. Whereas now, because it's every ride for the most part is exactly the same as the one you did last time, it'll be exactly the same as the one you do next time. Men in Black still gives you that opportunity to have a different experience, because you might just have one of those days where you're just not feeling it and things don't work properly, end up getting a crappy score, and then you have to go on it again. So it's just it is the ride at this point in the world that I have ridden more than anything else by a long shot. I love it.
Now, what is your take on that ride? Because it's been here in Universal for quite a while now. Are you worried about them doing something to that ride too?
Yes, I am, especially with the new movie coming out and nothing really happening. Yeah, I am concerned. We rode it back in February and it desperately needs some TLC as well. It's starting to look its age, and that worries me. Because when they stop taking care of their attractions, that's when you think, well, they're not really bothered about it anymore. So maybe they're just letting it go so they can go, look, this one's not, it's feeling its age. It's going to cost us X amount of dollars to upkeep it. Shall we just not replace it with something else? So yes, I am very concerned that
Let's talk about your most hated attraction. What's that, Lee? Shrek
4D. Why the hell that thing is still in that park?
Yeah, why is that
know.
Still there? That's been there from the early 2000s.
And it's we've talked about it again. It's a 3D theater, when 3D theaters aren't really a thing anymore. And it's the movie that's playing in that attraction is on the Blu-ray. You could probably watch it on YouTube at this point. So it's not like you're experiencing something that you can only experience at Universal Orlando because you can watch it at home. So I don't know. I mean, there's rumors there's going to be another Shrek movie. I don't know. But yeah, it's terrible.
It's a little outdated. We talked about outdated things. And
it really is.
Extremely outdated. If you could bring back any Universal ride or Islands of Adventure ride, what would it be?
Jaws, without a doubt. I don't even hesitate. It's awesome. I love that attraction, and it's one we've delved into the backstory and the history of it and talked to team members who've worked it and skippers, and it was a one-of-a-kind attraction. It is. I love Diagon Alley, but it was possibly the best attraction Universal have ever done. When it worked, it was amazing. And again, having a live team member as a skipper, that experience you got was different every time you did it. Jaws.
We talked about Islands of Adventure, and how, there needs to be a lot more tender love and care, a lot more money put into it. With that said, Lee, what do you feel like as far as new rides or attractions they could put into Islands of Adventure to give it that more of a newer, because as you said, most of the rides have been there for consistently long periods of time, and there's not a lot of changeover where there has been at Universal Studios, rather.
Yeah, it's difficult because I think we've talked about not having space, but there's two areas in Islands of Adventure that are just ripe for removal at this point. Toon Lagoon, no one knows who Dudley Do-Right is anymore. Popeye's not really a thing, and then a lot of those other characters throughout that land, no one knows what comics. The kids don't know what comic strips are. There was rumors for a long time. I know the Lord of the Rings franchise is something that has been a lot of theme parks have kind of danced around trying to get the rights to, and that was banded around for going into Toon Lagoon for quite some time. And I think it would be a good land, but for me it's a little too similar to Harry Potter, I think. And especially being only two lands away from each other, I think it would be difficult. But I do think whatever they put in there, they need to step away from the water attractions a little bit, because we've said it before, that whole corner of the park with Jurassic Park and then Toon Lagoon is all water rides. And if you're not a water ride person, or it's that time of year where you don't want to get wet or whatever, then you're skipping that whole corner of the park, right?
Where can people find more about you, Lee, and listen to your podcast?
Well, as I said at the beginning, we are the Unofficial Universal Orlando podcast. You can find us, it's easy just to say, anywhere that you can find podcasts. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify are two of the easy places for people to find us. But if you're on any other podcast app, Google Podcasts, anywhere you can find us, or even if you're not on a podcast app or on iTunes or Spotify, you can find us at Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, or even over at our website, uuopodcast.com.
Lee, thanks so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.